So you can see that it is the fourth day of Hanukkah. I had to look at my candles just to make sure. Blow them out before they get to... Sorry, I just blew smoke all over you guys. So the fourth day of Hanukkah. And I was just going to spend a moment. I know that, when we get together as a family to light our Hanukkah candles and, say a few prayers, that, it's just a small family thing. We don't usually do a big Hanukkah thing with, everybody. But I wanted to just, for a moment, if you haven't, researched or done any gained any insight into this festival of Feast of Dedication, as sometimes they call it, or the Festival of Lights. How many of you have read the book of the Maccabees? You guys read the book of the Maccabees? That's not terribly long. I actually read it with the family. I just basically took the first book of the Maccabees and I broke it up into 8 parts. And I read one part per night to just reveal, the story. We just refresh the story every year with the kids to kind of let them know. And I think there's a really good lesson here overall, which is about being dedicated to our God in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation that would lead us off of different things, down different paths, following different rabbit trails, and, getting lost in the weeds. And, it really has to do with being willing to stand up for what is right and written in the Bible and stand against the culture. And that is the biggest thing that I take away from the season of Hanukkah every year is the need to stand up straight and not get swayed and pulled the way that the culture is taking us. And that, these people, 175 years before the Messiah, Yeshua, were being slaughtered and killed and trying to stand up and fight and became, one of the, not the first, but some of the first guerrilla fighters trying to fight against a gigantic occupying force. And I think that ultimately there's a lot of prophetic insight and significance in the book of Maccabees because it is so closely tied, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, so closely tied to the book of Daniel and Matthew chapter 25, the book of the Revelation. I mean, I think it's so closely intertwined, and I know that in previous years we have discussed that at some length, and I don't really want to spend a lot of time discussing this too much tonight, but just to say, if you haven't had an opportunity in a while to review the book of the Maccabees, I think it's a great idea. It really does shed a lot of light on the spirit of the Antichrist and the spirit of perversion and cultural sway in our society and how we need to stand firm and be dedicated to our God. I think that's the big takeaway there. So I would just encourage you to check it out, take a look at it. But what we're going to do is we're going to jump back into our study of the book of Genesis in chapter 18. It's going to be fairly short. I think that we'll just spend some additional time, hanging out and talking. And we've got some latkes, and we've got a lot of good food and drinks. So we'll be hanging out and just sharing. So we won't weigh you down too much with scholarship this evening.
Pretty sure we thank Keith for slaving all day over a hot stove.
That's right. Keith,
My pleasure.
Keith is always our latkes guy. He does some fabulous latkes, and he's got a bunch of them, and we are delighted. Always good stuff. So let's open up to. I apologize for the small writing again. It's been a little while. This is Genesis chapter 18. We've just finished the section on circumcision, and now we are moving to when these 3 things, angels, men, God, appears to Abram as he's sitting by a tree in the plains of Mamre. And I will go ahead and read through this one more time just to refresh ourselves since we didn't read through it last week. And then we will just spend a little while breaking apart the second half of this section because we did deal with the first half previously. All right, so Genesis chapter 18, right from the beginning, it says, and Yehovah visually appeared. Oops, I'm in the wrong translation, sorry. And Yehovah appeared to him, Abram that is, Abraham, by the oak terebinth plains of Mamre, while he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes, and behold, 3 men standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran to the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the ground, and said, Adonai, if I have now found favor in your eyes, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And let me bring a piece of bread, and refresh your hearts, and then go on, for this is why you have come to your servant. And they said, do as you have spoken. So Abraham ran into the tent to Sarah, and said, hurry, make ready 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hurried to prepare it. And he took curds and milk, and the calf which he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. And they said to him, where is Sarah your wife? And he said, behold, in the tent. And he said, I shall certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife is to have a son. And Sarah was listening in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah was past the way of women. And Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my master being old too? And Yehovah said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I truly have a child since I am old? Is any matter too hard for Yehovah? At the appointed time I am going to return to you, according to the time of life, and Sarah is to have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. And the men rose up from there and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them away. And Yehovah said, shall I conceal from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham is certainly going to become a great and mighty nation, and all of the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him, so that he commands his children and his household after him to guard the way of Yehovah, to do righteousness and right ruling, so that Yehovah brings to Abraham what he has spoken to him. And Yehovah said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very heavy, I am going down now to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I know. So the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Yehovah still stood before Abraham. And Abraham drew near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to act in this way, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be just as the wicked. Far be it from you. Does not the judge of all the earth not do right? And Yehovah said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I shall spare all the place for their sakes. And Abraham answered and said, behold, please, I who am but dust and ashes have taken it upon myself to speak to Yehovah. Suppose there are 5 less than the 50 righteous. Would you destroy all the city for lack of 5? And he said, if I find there 45, I do not destroy it. And he spoke to him yet again and said, suppose there are found 40. And he said, I would not do it for the sake of 40. And he said, let not Yehovah be displeased, and let me speak. Suppose there are found 30. And he said, I would not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, behold, please, I have taken it upon myself to speak to Yehovah. Suppose there are found 20. And he said, I would not destroy it for the sake of 20. And he said, let not Yehovah be displeased, and let me speak only once more. Suppose there are found 10. And he said, I would not destroy it for the sake of 10. Then Yehovah went away as soon as he had ended speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So there is Genesis chapter 18, and we have some very, very interesting things happening here. And I know that last week we spent a decent amount of time just tearing apart the first, say 14 verses probably. Now I wanted to ask you regarding this section and one that came previously about how Abraham, when he heard the news that Sarah was going to have a child, he fell down on his face and bust out laughing. Now when Sarah hears the news, she laughs within herself. She gets a little chastisement, a little gentle rebuke here. Yet they both laughed, and in fact the Hebrew word is the same. What is it, do you suppose, about these two and how something happened? Why is she get in trouble and he does not? Why did she laugh in the wrong way? What is the primary difference that you see there? Anyone? Because she's a woman? Oh, goodness. Jane's opening up a can of worms.
Making up for that garden incident.
Making up for that garden incident. Oh, my goodness.
Well, maybe it was because when he laughed right forwardly. He wasn't hiding anything. And she was embarrassed or afraid, and she did.
Okay.
She kept it to herself.
And
Okay.
she denied that she
Yes.
did.
Yeah, she denied, yeah.
I thought it was also after he left, he was then of course the covenant was made.
Mm.
So she should now have known that there was a promise. That God really has to.
You would think that would have been something that really stuck in Abraham's mind and that he would have shared with his
Especially
wife.
her.
Yeah, especially her.
That's one of the
There's just no
differences.
way that he would have not told her what had happened in the previous chapter.
Right.
Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense if he's withheld that information for her. I mean, God appeared to him and said, "No, Sarah, your wife, is going to have a child." And he falls down on his face laughing, and he certainly would have told his wife. So Angela, I apologize.
Maybe he laughed like he would, like in a joyful way.
Yeah.
Like if he won the lottery, he'd be, oh,
Sure.
Maybe when she laughed, it was more like, yeah, right.
I think you're
There's
exactly
different
right.
kinds of laughter.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. He did. Yeah, I was about to say there are two main differences in the text. One says that he laughed out loud and she laughed within herself. And the other is that she was in concealment behind the tent and he threw himself on the ground and laughed out loud. Now, what does it mean when you throw yourself on the ground?
Oh, submission.
What does it always mean every single time in the Torah when you see someone with their face to the ground?
Worship.
It is worship. Remember, and I'll mention this just one more time, then I promise I'll stop. No, I don't. Worship and praise are very different things. When you hear about a praise team, there's no such thing as a praise team.
There's no such thing as a worship team.
Excuse me, I apologize. I misspoke. There's no such thing as a worship team. There is, unless that worship team is a group of people on their faces.
We could make that happen.
We could totally make that happen, yes, but I've never seen an actual worship team. Wouldn't that be strange if you went to a church and you saw a group of people on the stage with their faces to the ground, just being absolutely silent and encouraging everybody by their behavior to get on the ground with your face to the ground? That would be a worship service. But that would not be what we are used to hearing in regards to a worship service. But I've encouraged you many times to take a look at that there is no such thing in the Scripture of worshiping God with music. The two are never, ever connected, except for one time in the Bible. One time, worship and praise having to do with music are connected in the Bible. Does anyone know where that might be?
Isn't that David?
No. It was with...
Paul's house.
Make a joyful noise.
No. It's in the Torah. It's not in the Torah. It's in the Tanakh. It's in the book of Daniel. when Nebuchadnezzar sets up the statue of gold and says, if now you hear the sound of the lyre and the pipe and everything, then you will bow down and worship.
That's not good worship.
That is the only time in the Bible that worship and music are connected. Did you know that? What does that make you think? I don't want you to think too hard and go too crazy, but Keith, you
So
look
you're trying
like...
to point out it's a pagan thing.
No.
No.
Far be it.
What you're saying with the music and it's...
Oh, I'm just saying that the only time that worship and music are connected in the Bible by those words that refer to worship
Right.
and music is in that one instance with Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay.
So you can take from that what you will, but please don't hear me saying that going to a church and worshiping, praising God with musical instruments and everything is somehow pagan. That is not what I am suggesting. What I am suggesting is we have a confusion of terms. Worship is an entirely spiritual exercise which the flesh has absolutely nothing to do with. There is no physical movement, there is no sound, there is nothing. I challenge you, look in the Bible. Every time the word worship is found in your Bible, somebody has their face to the ground and they are absolutely silent every single time.
So maybe we got real good at praising, but forgot what worship was.
I think that's a fair characterization, and I think that praising God is fabulous, and David praised a lot, and you can see in the books of the Chronicles and the Kings that David was masterful at worshiping. He was a worship leader, a praise leader, excuse me. See how the language has become corrupted? Even, we can't even hardly speak about it without kind of confusing terms. David was a praise specialist, an expert on the harp. Remember how he used to play that harp and it would drive demons away who were plaguing Shaul, the king. So I think we just want to remember that worship, this is what Abraham did. He laughed out loud and fell with his face to the ground in worship. And I think that is a key, and that Sarah kept it within herself. And the sages, of course, in the Bereshit Rabbah, the Genesis Rabbah, have said, the problem here probably is that Sarah didn't laugh enough. That she was not expressing joy. She was having some cynical laughter. She was having a bit of cynicism.
Well, you said Abraham laughed, and when he was on the ground, he became silent.
Yeah. Sorry, Carla?
In this version of the word that I have here tonight, I saw in verse 12 there that I'd never seen before in this version. It says that she laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that could have been her line was like,
that is you know what? That's a good insight. It's interesting how different Bible translations can really just maybe shed some light on it. I think, whether you're a purist and you think, hey, this translation that I've got is like the most pure, that's a great thing. But you know what? The Spirit can speak to you when you read different translations, especially if you got one of those electronic Bibles and you just switch back and forth. I do that all the time, just read the same passage in 10 different translations. Something will come to your mind, and I think that's a great insight that she could have perhaps been saying, really, now, after I've been waiting for 30 years and I'm all worn out and tired, I'm about to die, I'm going to have a child and then die of old age. That's great.
I think her human nature too, being, created in God's image, but still being human, and in the flesh, she was just thinking logically, and she wasn't going beyond that because it seemed so impossible.
Yes, that is a great.
Impossible.
That is a great
that was
insight.
The first thing that was in front of her mind.
Right.
It was not him, because he wasn't the one having a baby.
No.
She was.
That's true. That's true.
I mean,
That's a
he could
great
have children
insight.
for the rest of his life, probably, but her, she's like, oh no.
And he will. When she dies, he'll go on to have a whole
Yes.
bunch of children with another woman. Yes,
Yeah.
Angela?
Well, I'm waiting for Tracy to say it.
Oh, I didn't even see
that
Tracy's hand
goes
up.
with her thing about the flesh man and the spirit man, and this Isaac and Ishmael. One was devised by flesh and human plans,
Yes.
and this new thing, like Thelma was just alluding to, was a spiritual thing.
Yes.
And in her flesh, at her old age, she didn't see how that was going to happen.
Right.
So she's not seeing this
Right.
from a spiritual perspective. When Isaac is going to be
The
child
spiritual
of
descendant.
the Spirit.
Right. And we had noted previously that one of the first times that Abraham received this promise was that his children would be like the dust of the earth. And that represents the physical seed of Ishmael. And that then the next revelation was your children will be like the stars in the sky. This is an elevated or spiritual descendants counted through Isaac. So that, yes, there's a dichotomy here that Abraham's reaction to this news seems to be a joyous outburst of, I mean, I know that it's like Angela said, you win the lottery or something, Publishers Clearinghouse comes to the door and hands you one of those jumbo checks for $1 million, there are times when your joy can just break out in laughter. That seems to be what Abraham was experiencing, and he fell down in worship because he believed. Sarah does seem to have had a little bit of a fleshly reaction, and her faith was probably not as weak, or probably not as strong. And we have to also remember that according to what we know explicitly in the text, this is the first time that this type of an epiphany, a spiritual experience, Sarah has actually been a part of it. This is the first time. In all of these years, God has appeared to Abraham. And we don't ever hear about Sarah even being nearby when God is speaking to or appearing to in some way, or he gets a vision from God or something. Sarah is never mentioned. So I don't know why that is. I'm not making any suggestions about why that might be, but what I am suggesting is that, and I also don't want to go too far with that and say that it is because Abraham has had visitations from God that maybe his faith is stronger, because we've heard several times that, just because you see miracles, that doesn't always change the human heart. We can see what happened to the children of Israel in the wilderness, that, seeing all those miracles in Egypt and in the wilderness for 40 years didn't seem to have done them a lick of good. So it's not that miracles are going to help you in your faith. Yeshua said the same thing about Lazarus and the poor man. He said, go and talk to my brothers. He's like, even if somebody was raised from the dead, they're not going to listen. They have Moses and the prophets, and if they're not willing to listen to them, even though somebody was raised from the dead, they will not listen. So that's a good point. Now, what I wanted to point out, unfortunately, is that this is often how we ourselves respond to the promises of God. There's a lesson here for us that we can become rather glib regarding the promises that God made or makes to us. We have also talked just a couple of weeks ago, I think, if I remember correctly, that we needed to discuss and perhaps even begin to do a little bit of research about what exactly has God promised me. Because you know how we talked about you can, arrogate promises to yourself that were not intended for you. We have a lot of misconceptions regarding what did God actually promise you? What can you count on God for? What did he explicitly state, I will do for you, that is totally applicable to you? You can't, you couldn't possibly take it out of context. If you don't know what those promises are, how can you have faith in God? Faith in what he'll do. What's that?
You're trying to buy something or sell something that you don't even know anything about. How can you give someone something that you don't possess?
Right. Absolutely.
It doesn't belong to you.
Yeah, you can't really have a whole lot of faith in God if you're not aware of what his promises are. You have to know what he has promised you. And unfortunately, our faith diminishes the more grandiose the promises become. Where this is a woman having a child at a ripe old age of 90. She's well into menopause by several decades, I presume. I don't know when that starts for women, but I've heard through the grapevine that it could be 50-ish. So she's passed the way of women for some time. And, this, to me, this doesn't seem as big as, say, some of the stuff that happens in the book of Exodus. Plagues and the splitting of the Red Sea and stuff like that. I mean, this is just a woman having a child at 90 years old. And we see that on a few occasions in the Bible. In fact, I want to encourage you to take a look at the first chapter of the book of Luke. There are some tremendous spiritual parallels here with the announcement of the birth of Yochanan the Immerser and the Messiah Yeshua that are strikingly similar to the accounts here in the book of Genesis, which are truly fascinating.
I have a question about that. It's funny that you're saying that, because I was thinking a little while about what you said about she got rebuked,
Mhm.
he didn't, and almost the same happened in Luke as well. Where
Only
you
it was
went through
reversed.
this in reversed order.
Yes,
I
Zechariah.
still can't figure out why that was.
Yeah, I don't know, and I haven't. Yeah, I haven't studied it thoroughly. I was just reading that, as I was going through different sections of the Haftorah portions, and saw that, man, this is so incredibly similar to what happens in the book of Luke. Only that was reversed. That Zechariah was not believing and was struck dumb for 9 months, apparently, roughly 9 months. It's kind of curious, very interesting. So yeah, I think that we. Oh, sorry, Tracy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, on a spiritual level, that doubt is among many people today, because if we understand the parable of the sower, the seed is the word of God, and Yahushua Messiah is the promised seed that was sent from God to the earth to indwell in us.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a little bit of a foreshadowing of that people don't really understand that he is that seed, that word, his word in me, and that I can understand it through him.
Mm-hmm.
He can teach it to me. He can make me understand it. And so many people say, well, I can't read my Bible. I don't understand it. But whatever happened to, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Surely he can help you understand this word.
Yeah, that's true. We've talked about that many times, and I think that's a problem that all of us have had in our religion, is that we just don't read it. We don't read our Bibles very much.
Because we don't believe we can understand it. I've just heard it so many times.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
I
I think that, there's some truth to the concept that David spoke about in the Proverbs that says, as a man thinketh, therefore is he. So that if you lack confidence, you will be lacking confidence. What happens in your head really does translate into your life. And I think that if you have a defeatist kind of attitude, and this is too hard for me. I know, many people, my mother actually being one, who was a housewife for a number of years and unfortunately went through a divorce and had to reinvent herself at the age of, I don't know how old, 47? So reinventing yourself at that age and feeling like I've been a housewife for my whole life and I don't know, I'm in serious trouble. I don't know what I'm doing. But you know what? She had to overcome those insecurities and have faith in God and in herself and in her own abilities to overcome those things and kind of build a life for herself. And she's done a spectacular job, putting herself together with the help of God and the support of loved ones. So that's an encouraging thing to know, what are the promises of God, to have confidence in Him and in yourself, and to truly believe those things which seem to be unbelievable. Abraham did not seem to have a huge problem with that. James, did you want to speak?
It's just interesting as I'm looking back at this. He did challenge the command of where he fell on his face, but he was challenging. He goes all the way to the point where he's negotiating for Ishmael.
Oh yeah, yes he does.
And you think of Gideon challenged. Who said do this and challenge it.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's some kind of balance between where challenge is okay.
Well, you can see
it's a lack of faith within that challenge, and
right.
And what we see within Sarah is that she challenged but quietly and didn't really. So it was this challenge that couldn't be resolved.
Sure.
Because it was totally internal, so it never was overt.
Sure.
And I think we see that in other places where we see challenges where people just say, "Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea," and they just walk away from it. That's where it becomes very destructive.
Sure. That's a good insight.
When we overtly go and say, "I'm not sure about this," and face it off, as long as we do that with respect,
sure.
I'd have to really go study it, but I think those are times where the Almighty's been sort of says, "Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Let's engage. Let's go through this, and I'm going to dialogue and walk through this with you."
Yeah,
there's a point where you need to back off.
That's a great insight, and I think that you can see that when Abraham does confront, in a sense, kind of laid back about Ishmael. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. He loves his son, and he also probably knows about the promises that were made regarding Ishmael to his mother Hagar. And also, there's clear indication here that to me, this is like taking a giant leap forward and getting in the face of God and saying, wait a minute, you're going to judge the righteous and the wicked the same? Far be it from you that you wouldn't do that, would you? That's a tremendous thing. And I think that God is totally okay with that. I really do. Frankly, you know what that has been occurring to me lately that I think that, you let me know what you think of this, that I consider myself to be a decent father. You know, I try to treat my kids well. I encourage my kids to come to me, talk to me about anything. I want to be approachable. And if they do come to me, I'm not going to be threatened by them. I don't want them to challenge my authority or anything, but I certainly want them to, you know what if I even made a mistake or said something stupid or whatever, and they wanted to call me out on it and say, you know what, Dad, you said, it was just a couple of weeks ago that I totally said something in here that was completely backwards, and I needed to come before you and say, you know what, I apologize, I misspoke on that. If I am able to withstand the onslaught of my 11-year-old who says to me, Dad, I want to ask you about this because I don't understand it, or I have a different idea, or something like that. Am I offended? Can I handle that? Of course I can. Can God handle you saying, you know what, God, I don't get this. I don't understand the promise that you've made. I am having trouble believing that you promised that you made. I don't know if this is for me. I think in that sense, James, I would agree with you 100% that it's okay that Abraham is challenged, and I think that God revels in it. I think that he engaged in this conversation with him. I mean, this is a kind of lengthy, strange conversation where Abraham is continuously going, okay, what if there's only 5 less? Well, you could have cut to the chase right quick on this thing, but it just goes on and on and on. What if there's only 5 less? What if there's only 5? Okay, I won't do it. Okay, I won't do it. Just goes on and on and on. Tracy, I apologize. And then, go ahead, Tracy.
Oh, I was just going to say your example is great because consider from God's perspective, if we have questions about his word, and we should.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, it's full of questions.
We should go to him. It's the same way, if your child has a question about something you told him, and they came to me and asked me,
That might be a little odd.
how would that make you feel?
It would make me feel like they trusted you more than me.
Exactly. And that's
wouldn't
what we
be good.
need to remember, is that we need to come to God through
Yeah.
his word and not listen to men tell us their opinion of his word.
Great insight.
We can take things and, compare it to his word, and we certainly teach and help each other.
Yeah.
But when we let other men tell us what they think this says,
Sure.
there can be great error in that.
Absolutely. And we need to be like the Bereans who said, this sounds really cool. Let me check it out with the scriptures and I'll get back to you. So I would encourage us to do that at all times. We can, like Tracy says, learn from each other. And there are wonderful teachers out there who can teach us many great things. But we can't just sit back on our haunches and listen to what people say and never open up our Bibles and test it and see if what
if they
they're...
had stood in my presence, they would speak my words to the people and
Right.
cause them to repent. So
Right.
that's a key there.
Sure.
They must be speaking
Absolutely.
words.
We have to be more diligent. We absolutely do. Carla?
I think when I've read this portion many times before, I always think of Abraham kind of challenging God for the next thing. But as we're talking here, and I agree with Tracy, to me, it's like this learning of a child to the father.
Mm-hmm.
And Abraham's learning some characteristics of God as they're dialoguing. It's a communication
Right.
between them, and Abraham's learning things about his father that he probably didn't know by
Right.
asking these questions.
Yeah,
I think it's deeper than just the numbers.
sure. Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
have to remember, he said, I am with you always.
Yes. And we also remember in our previous section in chapter 17 at the beginning, he was like, be tamim, be upright, and walk before me. So he is now walking forward, the head of God. Remember we talked about the children who are walking with the hand, and one who's a little older, a little more mature, who can walk before God and lead and hear God's voice behind him as he's walking, so that he is more mature. He's pushing to be more mature. And we can see Abraham maturing. He's getting to the point of being, if you might want to say, this is Abraham as a spiritual teenager, beginning to question authority. And he's saying to God, I don't understand this. Who's he thinking? What is he probably primarily concerned about? His nephew Lot, who is in Sodom. Now, is Lot a righteous person? Well, we haven't seen any evidence of it in our Torahs, but according to Peter and a few others, Lot is a righteous man. Peter says it 4 times. And we'll get to that in the next chapter when we go to visit Sodom and see what's going on with Lot and these angels, but that's for next time. But yeah, he's probably thinking about Lot. And he's like, are you going to destroy Lot? I mean, can we do something about Lot? And that's that's so like a teenager. They're not going to tell you what they actually want to ask you about. They're going to come around the back, try and do it in a sneaky way. Well, are you going to destroy everybody? What he could have said right off the bat is, what about Lot? Only one guy. Oh, he's got a wife and a couple of daughters, and I think the daughters are engaged. Could we do something? I think, let's say, Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters, and 6? How about 6? Can we just start with 6? But I don't know. Sorry, Tracy. Who was going? Oh, Velma. Sorry.
I think in this scripture too, it also shows, and God says in His Word that He knows the thoughts and the intents of your heart, and He knew the thoughts and the intents of His heart.
Yes,
in
absolutely.
that approach, in that conversation.
Yes.
Which is, I really want to know.
Yes.
If our thoughts and our intents aren't correct, then it would be like, the door shut. I don't want to hear what you have to say. There's not going to be conversing.
Yeah.
And I'm not open to hear what you have to say.
That's right. That's right. And I think that being a parent and learning to listen to your children has been a huge eye-opener for me. I mean, those of us who have children have definitely become very much aware that having children changes you in dramatic ways that you couldn't even have comprehended before. But if you don't listen to your children, they will go and talk to somebody else who will listen to them. And then you've lost your influence, and that's not a good thing. So being willing to listen. God is certainly willing to listen. And I think Abraham knows that. He's comfortable with presenting his plea before God and his questions, doubts, ideas, concerns that he has. He has no fear of that.
I think, too, that the bartering taking place doesn't go against his ultimate plan. It doesn't bind you by.
Yeah.
Had the last barter been, what if you don't find any? Can you give him another chance?
Sure.
He might not have said yes.
Yeah.
Right? Because ultimately he wanted to cleanse this out.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, in James, this is kind of what you're saying, and God is listening to Abraham. And in James it says, be quick to listen.
Slow to speak and slow to anger.
And slow to anger. And if as parents, if we did more of that, or as friends, or as husbands, or as wives, if we did more of that, we would be much better off. Absolutely.
That's why you have 1 mouth hole and 2 ear holes.
Yeah.
Well, in regards to, us talking about God having this conversation with Abraham, I think there's an interesting thing here. And you'll note that previously I mentioned regarding verse 22. Did anybody notice that? And we talked about that briefly. I told you to I just wanted to draw your attention to where it says here in verse 22, so the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Yehovah still stood before Abraham. Now, most of your texts probably say Abraham still stood before God. They've switched it. Did you notice that? What is that? Now, you might say, oh, that's just some weird translation error or something, but you would be incorrect. This is what is called Tikkun Suffering. There are this is debatable, but there are between 13 and 18 sections in the Tanakh where the scribes, the Masoretic scribes, took some liberties with the Hebrew text because it just offended their sensibilities. And they have a whole host of reasons why, and you can read all about them in the Midrash Rabbah. That in the text, literally, it says Yehovah still stood before Abraham. But in all of our translations, most of them, it says that Abraham still stood before Yehovah, because it just is jarring to see that God is like standing before Abraham waiting on him. And that that seemed to be slightly demeaning to God. And so the Masoretic scribes in the 200 to 300 AD decided this just isn't right. Maybe they figured somebody made a mistake, but this really offended their sensibilities. And we have spoken many times about how the copies of the Hebrew Bible that we have are really, really good. Very, very incredibly accurate, going way down through history, all the way to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which there are just so many minor variations. But this is one of them. There are only between 13 and 18 places in the scriptures where the Hebrew scribes themselves said this just can't be right. And they switched it on purpose.
How do we know that? Like, does the Dead Sea Scrolls have it reversed?
Yes.
And did we not know until we found the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yes. This is fairly current scholarship.
So reversed in.
Well, we had.
Here?
Yes. Because we have actually, well, here's, not in this particular section, because this particular verse in the Dead Sea Scrolls is unreadable in that section. But of the 13 scribal corrections, or Tikkun Suffering is what they call them, you can look it up. And Tim Hegg, are you familiar with Tim Hegg from Torah Resource? He's a very, very scholarly kind of guy. He's like a, professor, doctorate level Hebrew studies type of stuff. It's in Midwestern universities. He's got a paper written about this, and the reason that you know that they existed is because in the Mishnah and the Talmud, the sages have been talking about this for a long, long time. That when you reach a certain, but you wouldn't notice if you hadn't read those things quite a bit, and to note that, Rashi says, read this instead of what it says, read it this way. And then some other commentator would say, well, why is that? And they'd get into this debate. And so it is known in the rabbinic circles that there are between 13 and 18 portions of the scripture where the scribes made deliberate changes for one reason or another.
I still don't understand what the issue is, what they had, because it happened more often that God was standing in front of someone.
I can understand kind of, because it seems like, what it seemed like to them is that this was somehow demeaning towards God, because the text, according to, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, please don't believe that I am, that there is some indication that Abraham is sitting and that God is standing in front of Abraham, and that is just someone who's standing is in submission to the one who is sitting. And that is part of the reason that this was changed, is because this can't be right. God would not be standing in front of Abraham when Abraham is sitting. Now, I'm not just bringing this to your attention because it's some type of, historical biblical trivia. I think it's directly related to why Abraham, it's related to a couple of things. Do you believe that our God is actually a humble God?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he is absolutely humble. I think that our highest act of worshiping him is serving others. I mean, how humble is that? The best thing you can do for me is do something nice to somebody else. That's humble, okay? And secondly, I think that he's standing here before Abraham because he is expecting Abraham to ask these questions. He's encouraging Abraham to ask these questions. Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? I think that's why he's lingering, and he's standing in front of Abraham, and he's waiting. That seems to be the whole implication in what the scribes found so offensive, is that God is standing in a humble situation waiting on Abraham. It's like, I just told you that I'm going down to Sodom to see what's going on there, and then I'm going to judge that place. You got anything to say about that? And he just stands there. I think he's waiting for Abraham to pipe up and voice his concerns, voice his problems that he has with this, just like James was talking about.
We have a similar situation on Mount Sinai with Moses.
Interceding after the golden calf, yes, absolutely. I think that this is a big test for Abraham.
But doesn't that also give us our hope?
Yes, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And we'll talk a lot about that next week when we get to this section dealing with Sodom. But yeah, I think that therein lies a tremendous amount of our hope, is that basically you can look at Moses interceding on Mount Sinai, and you can look at Abraham interceding for the people in Sodom. Now they're slightly different because Abraham is saying, hey, there's got to be a few good people there. You can't destroy the righteous and the wicked. But of course, now Moses is taking that a little bit further and saying these people are jacked. They deserve to die. I understand they have totally screwed this up, but please. Now that's some serious compassion. This is a little bit different.
Abraham was speaking, the Bible says that out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. Abraham was speaking out of the abundance of his heart.
Yeah.
His genuine concern for those people.
Yeah. Now, Lou was mentioning just a moment ago about the hope that we have. Now, if anybody wants to pick up on that, or if Lou, you want to elucidate a little bit further, how do you mean that? In what sense do you mean that?
Well, I think God, even if He...
Is it a comfort to you to know that God does not destroy the righteous and the wicked
Right.
together?
It is.
That is, to me...
Yeah, and to me, that's what He did on the cross.
Yes. Brilliant insight. Now, far be it from me to be sitting here to you saying, this fills me with hope because I know that I'm righteous and y'all are going to die. The world can go to hell in a handbasket and y'all are going to die and I'm okay because I'm a righteous person.
Your righteousness is filthy rags then.
Now you sound
That's the way you really feel.
Well, yeah, that might be me thinking not very clearly about myself.
Yeah.
But it does let me know that because of the righteousness of the Messiah which is imputed, that I can be considered righteous, because my trying to observe the Torah as best I can is going to fall short. It's definitely going to fall short. And I can count on God. Yes, ma'am.
You use the word intercessor when you're talking about Moses and Abraham, but
Yeah.
ultimately
Yeshua is
Yeshua was the
Well, and I think we can agree that these are prophetic shadow pictures of what the role of the Messiah is.
I think from both of these incidents, we can see that God's just looking for an excuse to save as many people as He can. I mean, He just loves people.
I think that's a huge, huge insight that we can all, it should all remember very much. That if you are coming across a teaching or a branch of religion or something which is making it seem like you got to jump through some hoops and that God is an angry God and He just wants to destroy people and He's just looking for an opportunity, you have found the wrong thing. You need to really have it in your mind, and I think you begin to see this all over the place, that God is just looking to catch you doing something right. Seriously. And He gets excited and is jumping up and down and patting you on the back. He's just waiting for any opportunity for His children to demonstrate that they're ready and willing and able to do something right. He's not ready to pounce on you, watching you like a hawk to make sure that you don't do anything wrong. I mean, are you like that with your children? Maybe some of you were. I don't know. How did that go over for you? Probably not well, if I had to guess. But I'm saying, praise and building up and encouraging is going to go a lot better than watching somebody over their shoulder. Because what happens when you watch somebody over their shoulder like a hawk? Well, as soon as you're not watching over their shoulder like a hawk, what's going to happen? They're going to go hog wild. Yeah. They're not going to do anything wrong while you're watching them, but as soon as they get out from under your hawk-like gaze, they're going to go crazy. You can't get away from God, but I think we need to get away from that perception of God as, He's got His thumb on you. He's watching you all the time, ready to destroy you at the slightest misstep. He's waiting for you to do something right because He wants to reward you.
What did the Messiah say on the cross?
Forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing.
And what did Stephen say when they stoned him?
Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Yeah, good choice. Angela?
Oh, the parenting style. It paralyzes the kid.
What does?
When they're being watched.
Oh, being
and they
observed?
know that anything they do wrong is going to be picked out. I remember trying to use the tools. And when Dad wasn't watching, I could use that drill like a pro. As soon as he was looking at me, I could not make that thing work. It paralyzed me because I didn't want to do wrong. I don't think He wants us paralyzed.
Yeah.
But if we perceive Him as that kind of parent, that's
That's
Yeah.
freeze.
Yeah, and that our perceptions of God can be mightily, mightily skewed.
What you're talking about, I'm a scuba diving instructor as well, and there's a whole section that I went through in some of my training. It's called the psychology of evaluation, and you modify behavior when you evaluate, and sometimes there's a good element to that. You want to see how embedded that behavior is, so you create a stressor to see if they completely fall apart, or if the skill set or whatever that you're evaluating is truly embedded and they can do it even with the stressor. But it has to be in a very controlled, confined environment.
Sure.
Because when it's not well embedded, you can induce failure, and then you can declare that as failure when really the evaluation is what induced it.
Right. That's a good, keen insight.
You
Absolutely.
just described the seed on the rocks.
There you go.
Because they don't have it, the root embedded in them.
Yeah.
So that for joy, they spring up and say, yes, yes.
I'm
I can
ready to do
this."
it.
But then when they are given tribulation or trial because of the Word of God, which that could be in the flesh form of Messiah or the literal form of His Word, they wither. They
Sure.
fall away.
That's a great insight, James, and and Tracy, thank you. It made me think of how God tests us, and how we need to be put through tests. I mean, if you love somebody and you're trying to teach them something, you want to give them opportunities to practice. And I know that we have a lot of negative baggage that we carry around because of math test anxiety or whatever it is, but if you don't get tested, you don't know if you actually know that thing. And that's when
Nothing's in you till you get tested.
that's right. You don't know whether it's
You really know about God. Where's your roots?
right.
You're
Absolutely.
always silent during the test.
That's right. And when we talked about that right at the beginning when we started studying, we noticed in that first word of Bereshit, when we were talking about God hiding himself in the creation so that there is a bit of separation, so that he's not looking over your shoulder the whole time and you can totally clearly perceive him. I mean, who's going to do wrong when somebody's watching you all the time?
Yeah.
That's how you have free will, is by God stepping back and hiding behind the curtain of creation so that he can see what are you going to do. That's a test right there. So that's a good insight. Excellent sharing, guys. So yeah, I think that because of this scribal error, that just brought my attention to why was God standing before Abraham. I think he was lingering and waiting to see if he could get Abraham to, what do you got to say about this? Now, in relation to that, why is it that God said the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very heavy, I am going down now to see whether they have done according to all that I have heard, so to speak? Why is that said? I mean, doesn't God know what's going on? And why does he have to go and investigate what is happening in Sodom? What is behind, what's the deal with that? Heath?
He's going to rescue Lot.
Well, he doesn't say that's why he's going. He says, I'm going to check it out to see if what I have heard is true.
Abraham to hear?
I think he absolutely said it for Abraham to hear. I think so. But why is that, Angela? Or Mike?
Mine wasn't why. I think it's one thing for God to know what's going on there. It's another thing for him to place himself there and watch them react to him. Like, if I come here and I am present, how do you react to me? I mean, that's almost like the clincher.
Yeah, good insight. Mike?
I was going to say the same thing, and we've talked about him bartering from 50 down to 10, which is 40.
Yes, it is.
40 is a testing, so
Yeah.
here's your test.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good insight. John?
A totally different question, and then listening from last week, you mentioned that a little bit, but so in the beginning where 3 men were coming to him, sorry to go back for 1 second, but
That's all right.
in my mind. Is there significance, do you think, with the number 3, and then the next chapter there are 2, or the later part of this chapter there are 2 angels, right, going to Sodom?
I do. And apparently Natalie does as well. No, I'm just kidding. You were looking at me like you had something you wanted to say. Do you have something you want to say? Okay. Her eyes got big for a second. She was like, what? No, I do, John, actually. I think that in some way, this is, of course, gematria, I don't, take it for what it's worth, but the number 3 in Gematria is very significant and speaks about the plenary power of God. That the glory, the Shekinah, somehow the presence of God is represented by the number 3.
Like Trinity or
Some people have interpreted that as in a Trinitarian type of fashion to represent the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, if you want to look at it that way. Is there an indication of that here? I don't know. It's certainly unusual, but in the fact, I think that you were, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're thinking, is there some reason that 2 go away to do something and God, well, one of them, God, whoever, stays behind in order to have this conversation with Abraham? I don't know that I could elucidate any spiritual insight into that. Perhaps Angela could.
I don't know. What you just said, I'm thinking God and then the Holy Spirit and His Son. I mean, those 2 are the ones that were sent into this.
So you're suggesting, for the sake of discussion, that the 2 angels who went to Sodom were the Son and the Spirit, and the Father was hanging out?
Just in a spiritual sense, that there's 1 that stays and 2 that go to take care of business.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's an interesting
That
insight.
pierce the veil and go into the...
That, you know what, that is actually an interesting insight, because the Spirit of God and the Son, if you want to put it that way, Yeshua the Messiah, pierce the veil and come into this dimension, this reality, however you want to put that, and that God is always staying behind the scenes. That is a good insight.
Also the wording about the bread and what is served, and if you look at the wording from when the bread is served, it's also knowledge.
Yeah.
The word.
Sure. Absolutely.
But then again, I thought also maybe they're just like angels or archangels. Because that happens also many times. That people actually see someone, but they're inhabited, or however you want to call it,
by the Spirit of God. Yeah, and then we spoke about that briefly last week, about how an angel is like a telephone. It's just a perfect conduit for the Spirit of God to speak through, so that when you see that the angel of the Lord appeared, it is actually speaking with the voice of God. If you think of an angel as a cell phone, and that the voice of God is coming through, I'm talking to James over here. Is this literally James? No, that's not literally James, but his voice is coming out of this thing. So in a sense, this thing represents James.
And they are called messenger.
They are called messengers. It's pre-technology. So it could be. You never know. But that's an interesting insight. Thank you, John, for that. So what I was asking was, why is it that God needs to go down and see?
Did he go down and see? Or
That's what the 2 angels went there for, apparently. And that's what they say to Lot when they visit Sodom. Yeah. So God, for whatever reason, has spoken twice, saying, I'm going down to check it out. Okay, you have hit on a very strong and important point there, Carla. She said 2 witnesses. The Torah talks about, what do you need? 2 to 3 witnesses. Okay, and I think that is also what he is sharing with Abraham here. I'm not going to make judgment based upon, I am infinite and I know everything, but I'm going to demonstrate to you, this is how we practice judgment. Excuse me?
I said due process.
Due process, yes. We do justice. So that's why the Torah says, justice, justice ye shall pursue. And it has the Hebrew word twice. It's not just emphasizing. It's saying you must exercise justice with justice. Like if you catch a thief and you can confirm that he is indeed guilty, and then you give him a punishment that's inappropriate, you have not pursued justice with justice.
I have a question. So God stood before Abraham. The other 2 went down, right?
Yeah.
Well, I may be wrong, but is God sort of standing there and he's kind of testing Abraham to see what Abraham will do?
I think so.
And does God test us?
Absolutely. Well, let me just speak for myself. Yes.
It says somewhere in the Bible, God
He
never tests.
doesn't tempt us.
Well, that's a good word. That's a good point. Is that Well, why would Yeshua tell the disciples to pray, do not, lead us not into temptation? What is that? I mean, does God lead us into temptation? Not really, no. What is James says each one is tested when he carries away by his own flesh. Okay, so there is some confusion regarding that, but does God test? Yes. Does he tempt? No. What's the difference?
Huge difference.
Tempted to get you to do something, testing.
So what is the source of temptation?
Flesh.
Okay, you can call it the devil if you want. The Jews would call it either the devil or Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. James says it comes right from inside you. Each one is carried away when he's enticed by his own lusts. So where's the source of temptations? Peter says, is it not the flesh and it's warring in your members? So God tests your adversary, or your own mind will tempt. Definitely a big difference.
And I think God tests whether you will walk in His word or not. Because
Yes.
that's what He said.
That's the main test I think he has for us is, are you
That's
going
the
to...
manna represented, whether
Right.
you would walk in His Torah or not.
Yes, absolutely. Angela, I apologize. Carry on.
If you think about just in the sense of being tempted or tested, like let's say in everyday life,
Mhm.
temptation is usually the goal there is failure.
Yeah,
And when you take a test, the goal there is to let you know what you do know and you don't know.
right.
It's
The,
not,
the goal is somebody wants you to succeed.
yes.
They're hoping that you succeed. That's a big
Or let
difference.
you know what you need to work on.
Yes.
In order to succeed.
In order to succeed. The goal is
one way or
success.
another. But tempting, the goal is
Failure.
yeah.
Destruction. Yes.
We can picture this too as how the Bible describes temptation, like with the woman that was tempting Joseph and trying to get him to be with her.
Sure.
And Yahweh in the Proverbs, it says that the word is a lamp and the law is a light to keep you from the strange
Temptress.
woman.
Yes.
So this temptation, this word will keep you from temptation.
Yeah. Or at least make you prepared.
And if you don't have it, then
You'll be able to fall prey to all kinds of temptation if you don't have a strong grounding in the Word. That's a big, big point, yeah. So that's excellent insights, you guys. And I think that what we want to learn here is that God is demonstrating for Abraham, I am going to go down and investigate to show you a principle that you must judge correctly. You must have witnesses. You must know for certain what is going on here. God doesn't need to know by going down and investigating. He knows what's in the hearts of these people, not just what they've been doing, but he's demonstrating for Abraham, I think, and also for Lot, that we need to use discernment and judgment and be able to make a good judgment.
And he
I think
answered
that's one of the first.
Abraham's prayer. He went down and checked out himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And be merciful.
And be merciful. Yes, this is also
Even though there was only there wasn't
6?
There obviously wasn't 5.
No,
But it
well, there was
less
turned
than
out to only be 4.
He still saved the few that were. Even maybe some who wasn't. I mean, he still pulled them out of there.
Yeah, absolutely. James.
There's it's tied to that, I think, but there's an interesting thing as we look at scripture throughout, but in this, we see a lot of times we'll look and say, okay, what's the spiritual application of this? And it's valuable and good to do that, but almost every single time there's a carnal or physical application.
Sure.
And I think back to parenting, like you talked about, that you can tell your kid, don't touch that, it's hot, and then they touch something and they get burned, and now they realize when that feels hot or is close to hot, I don't want to do that. So it seems like he really does this interesting combination of spiritual application followed by sort of a build up to a carnal implementation, and then followed through with then a spiritual outcome that just really drives that lesson home.
Beautiful insight. Yeah, great insight. Yeah. I mean, that's
Because we are spiritual and physical
Yes.
together.
yes.
And that's him teaching us how to navigate that. We're a special thing.
Yeah.
And we've got to figure out how to do this.
We are special creatures that are inhabited with flesh and spirit, and that we need to learn spiritual lessons and flesh lessons. And I think that there's so many applications for that. Absolutely. Do you guys have, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up so we can finish up and have some fellowship and eat some latkes and such. Do you have any additional comments, questions, or concerns that you would like to share with anyone? You're all just dumbfounded, huh? Awesome. Well, that was a great conversation. Thank you. Let us pray. We'll move forward.